There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being silenced by someone who then accuses you of not communicating. You know exactly what I mean. The cold shoulder that lasts for days, the dinner where no one speaks, the texts that go unanswered, not because they weren't seen, but because being seen and still ignored is the point. The narcissist's silent treatment isn't an absence of communication. It's communication in its cruelest form. A message that says, your existence is only valuable when I decide it is. And you've been on the receiving end of that, maybe many times. Maybe so many times that the space between their silences feels like borrowed time. But I want to tell you something today that took me a long time to understand, and that a lot of people in your position never get to hear. The narcissist taught you the most powerful tool you will ever use against their hold on you. They just didn't mean to, because when you go silent, not as punishment, not as a game, but as a genuine withdrawal of your energy, something happens in the narcissist's psychology that they are completely unprepared for. Something that, once it begins, they cannot stop, and they will never, ever tell you about it. Here's something the narcissist understood about you long before you understood it about yourself. Your empathy is a resource, and they built their entire emotional world around extracting it. Dr. Gabor Mate has written extensively about how early attachment wounds create people who either learn to shut down their emotional needs entirely or people who become exquisitely attuned to the emotions of others as a survival strategy. Narcissists fall into the first camp. Empaths often fall into the second. And when those two patterns meet, there's an almost gravitational pull between them. Because the narcissist needs someone who will feel what they refuse to feel. For themselves, every time you worried about them, every time you tried to explain yourself, defend yourself, soothe them, reach them, every anxious text at 2 a.m., every tear, every moment you extended yourself emotionally, that was supply. That was the narcissist's nervous system being regulated by yours. They didn't just want your love, they needed your reactivity, your pain, your attempts to fix things. That was the fuel. So when they go silent on you, it works. It works because it triggers your nervous system. It activates that deep, primal fear of abandonment. You scramble to reconnect, to apologize, to understand what you did wrong. And the whole time, they're watching, waiting, feeding. But here's what makes your silence categorically different, and why it doesn't just sting them. It destabilizes them in a way that nothing else can. When you go quiet, something shifts in the narcissist that they can't fully explain, and that inability to explain it is exactly what makes it so destabilizing. Think of it this way. A narcissist's sense of self, what psychologists call their ego structure, isn't built on an internal foundation. It's built on external reflection. They need to see themselves in your reactions, your admiration, your anger, your desperation, your tears. All of it acts like a mirror. As long as you're reacting, they exist in a way that feels real to them. When you stop reacting, the mirror goes dark. Clinical psychologists who specialize in cluster B personality disorders describe something called narcissistic supply deprivation. And what happens during it looks, from the outside, almost like withdrawal from a substance. The narcissist becomes agitated, dysregulated. In some cases, they cycle rapidly between rage and what appears to be remorse. Not because they've suddenly developed empathy, but because the mechanism that keeps their internal world stable has been switched off, and they don't have the inner resources to self-regulate without it. What you're witnessing, if you've ever watched a narcissist unravel when you pulled away, isn't someone who loves you and is afraid of losing you. It's someone whose psychological infrastructure is failing because the power source has been removed. That's a critical distinction, one you need to hold on to, especially when what follows starts to look convincing. There's a crucial distinction that almost no one talks about, and it's the difference between a silence that imprisons and a silence that liberates. The narcissist's silence is a calculated act of control. It has an agenda. It's designed to make you feel small, uncertain, desperate to return to their good graces. Their silence is a leash, invisible, but taut. You feel it pulling even when they're not in the room. Your silence is something else entirely. when you choose not to respond, not to the provocative text, not to the sudden reappearance after weeks of nothing, not to the friend who just wanted to let you know what the narcissist has been saying. You are not playing their game. You're stepping off the board. That's not cruelty. That's sovereignty. There's a meaningful difference between ignoring someone to punish them and simply no longer making yourself available to be consumed. Carl Jung spoke about the shadow self, those parts of us we suppress, often because expressing them was unsafe in our earliest relationships. For many empaths who've been through narcissistic abuse, silence has been in the shadow for a long time. Speaking up felt dangerous. Taking space felt selfish. Choosing yourself felt like abandonment of the other person. So you kept talking, kept trying, kept showing up even when every part of you was exhausted. Your silence now is not abandonment. It's the return of something you were taught to give away, your own presence, saved for yourself first. Once your silence holds, once the narcissist realizes you're not going to break, not going to call, not going to send the message they're waiting for, you'll start to see things. And I want to prepare you for what that looks like, because it can be disorienting if you're not ready for it. First, there's often escalation. The texts become more frequent, or they disappear entirely and then reappear with something designed to hook you. A crisis, a softened tone, a reference to something only the two of you would know. This is called hoovering after the vacuum cleaner, because the goal is to suck you back in. It can feel, in the moment, like finally being seen, like they've realized what they lost, like maybe this time things will be different. Your instincts were right before, when they told you something was wrong. Trust them now when they tell you this isn't change, it's desperation. Second, you may hear about the narcissist's reaction through other people. A mutual friend mentions they seem off lately. Someone says the narcissist has been talking about you. This is the supply shortage made visible. They're outsourcing the regulation they use to get directly from you, trying to get information, trying to find a way back into your awareness. And third, and this is the one that matters most, you'll notice something happening inside yourself, a quieting, a strange, unfamiliar sense of your own ground. Psychological research on trauma recovery consistently shows that the nervous system begins to regulate when the source of chronic stress is removed. Your body knows, even before your mind fully accepts it. That steadiness you feel is not numbness. It's the beginning of yourself returning. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because understanding the psychology is one thing, but living it is another. Especially when every instinct you've developed in this relationship has been trained toward connection, toward fixing, toward making sure the other person is okay, even at the cost of your own stability. Here's the first thing I want you to know. You don't have to perform your healing for anyone. This silence doesn't need to be dramatic. You don't need to send a final message explaining yourself. You don't owe them closure. Closure, for an empath healing from narcissistic abuse, almost never comes from the narcissist. It comes from the moment you decide you no longer need to. Their version of events to know what happened to you. The second thing, silence isn't the same as indifference, and you don't have to be indifferent to hold it. You're allowed to still have feelings about this person. You're allowed to grieve what you thought the relationship was. None of that contradicts your decision to protect your energy. Grief and boundaries can coexist. In fact, for most people healing from this kind of relationship, they have to. Third, be ready for your own mind to work against you. Trauma bonding is real. According to research on intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism used in slot machines, relationships with unpredictable rewards create stronger attachment than consistent ones. The highs with the narcissist were high specifically because the lows were so low. Your brain learned to crave the resolution. That craving is going to show up. It's going to sound like reasons to reach out, like exceptions, like just one more conversation. Recognize that voice for what it is. Not intuition, not love, but a nervous system still calibrated to a dynamic that was costing you everything. And finally, the goal of your silence isn't to break the narcissist. That might happen as a byproduct, but it's not the point. The point is that for perhaps the first time in this relationship, you are choosing yourself without justifying it, without apologizing for it, and without waiting for permission. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Your silence was never the absence of something. It was always the presence of you, reclaimed, protected, finally pointed inward instead of constantly outward towards someone who was never going to tend it the way you deserved. The narcissist used silence as a weapon because silence, in the right hands, is powerful. What they didn't anticipate is that they were handing it to exactly the right person. You, someone who has spent years feeling things deeply, processing what others refuse to process, extending grace to someone who mistook it for weakness. You are not weak. The depth of your empathy was never the problem. It was always the target. And now that you understand that, you get to choose differently. The silent treatment that breaks the narcissist's mind isn't rage. It isn't coldness. It isn't strategy. It's simply you, no longer available to be the mirror for someone else's fractured reflection. It's you, whole, quiet, and completely, finally free. Healing is not linear, and it's not always loud. Sometimes it looks exactly like this, like stillness, like the sound of your own life moving forward without them in it. You're already further along than you think.